framework, and you'll see this framework in the prompts that I'm going to demonstrate in a minute. Okay, so I'm providing this QR code here. Also in the chat, if you're not able to scan the QR code, there should be a link appearing for you as well. This QR code will take you to some of the examples I'm going to use today, and also some other examples that I've pulled from different sessions I've used before. These are all transcripts taken from ChatGPT, all on the free version, where you can see the types of prompts that I've used and the output it gives you. These are all in a teaching and learning context. Some of them will give you ideas to use after this session. These are links. This is a link that you can take away and use at your own discretion. Some of those you'll try out yourself and they won't work as well as they did for me. But as I say, that's back to that checking and iterating. Okay, so I'll just leave that on for about 10 seconds more. Hopefully the URL has appeared in the chat, and then I'm going to swap over into ChatGPT and start demonstrating some examples of the way we can use a chatbot to enhance our teaching. Okay, so let me come out of here. All right, so I'm just going to swap over into ChatGPT on here. Okay, hopefully you should all be able to see on your screen that I've got ChatGPT open. My version of ChatGPT may look slightly different to yours because I am on a paid version. However, I am using the free version, 3.5. If I was going to use the paid version, I'd go into 4 in here. So if you're not paying for it, you may not see some of the things that I'm seeing down the left, but largely it'll be the same. And it's going to function the same because, as I said, I'm using 3.5. Okay, so this example I've already prepared for you. It's available on that link that I just shared, or the QR code that I just shared. So when we talk about that framework that we used earlier in terms of prompting, and you look at what the way you should set out a prompt or the specific things that you should have in that prompt, you can see at the top that I've said, you are an education expert. That's the first thing I've done. So I've actually stated to the chatbot what its role should be. That's a clarification. So I've clarified to the chatbot that I want it to take on a particular persona or a particular role. This is actually really important in chatbots. Chatbots are designed, or the large language model behind them is designed in such a way that when you prompt them, they can take on certain personas. So if I didn't do this, there's a chance it may think that I was talking about something else when I began to explain things. So saying it's an education expert, you could have also said you are a teacher or you have knowledge of education, something like that. You can be direct and give it instructions. However, please do not be unpleasant to your chatbot. And I mean that seriously. It's been shown that the nicer you are to your chatbot, the better the responses are. I know that sounds a bit strange, but using please and thank you and manners, and even encouraging it with its responses, can actually produce better outcomes. Nobody quite knows why, and it does feel a little bit strange to be doing that. But yep, that apparently works. So you are an education expert is the first thing I've said here. Explain in simple terms what learning to learn is. So if you remember back on those points that we had on the slides, one of the main points that came out of that paragraph that I looked at was children must learn how to learn. So I'm looking at that first point. So I'm asking the chatbot, or I'm telling the chatbot to explain in simple terms what learning to learn is. I could have said what learn to learn is, but I just chose learning to learn is. So it then gives me output here. So if you're struggling to understand what learning to learn is, say it's a new term to you, or you're not quite sure, or even if you need a reminder, this can be a good place to start. So I've said in simple terms. Another phrase I could have used is explain to a particular age group if I wanted to do that. So Then I've broken that down again. This is the nature of a chatbot. If you've never used a chatbot before, the idea is you're having a chat with it. It's a conversation. It starts at one place and can be extended on. So there's memory involved here. Now, you also got to appreciate that sometimes the chatbot will lose the thread. So sometimes you have to remind it and bring it back to what you're trying to talk about. In this case, it doesn't. It understands what I'm talking about. So I've said, what are the main learning elements of learning to learn? So we're diving a bit deeper. So now it starts to break this down. And it's broken it down into metacognition, self-regulation, active engagement, adaptability, critical thinking, collaboration. If you go on the internet and try and find resources about learning to learn, you will find some people define it slightly differently, but they're the common sort of terms. So then I've asked it to provide 3 simple and fun exercises for metacognition. So I'm diving into one of these areas here. So I could do that with all of these areas, but I'm only doing it with one. And when I showed you that graphic before, and I talked about the idea of frame the output in steps, this is that idea. So what we can do is we can get the output from a chatbot and then start to dive into different aspects of it. So that's what I'm doing. Provide 3 simple and fun exercises for metacognition that can be used with. And I was told that some of your class sizes are considerably large. So I just went for 50 12-year-olds in a classroom who do not have access to technology. So we're keeping it paper-based here. So I'm asking for simple and fun exercises for metacognition that can be used with a lot of students. There doesn't have to be 50. If you've only got 30, it's not going to make a lot of difference here. And it's starting to give me these ideas. Now, notice I've quantified it. I've asked for 3. If I'd have not asked for 3, it might have given me 1 or 12. Yeah. So be specific about what you want. I've asked for simple and fun exercises. So I'm expecting it to give me something that gives me, that stimulates students. And I've said 12-year-olds. So I'm expecting it to pitch at that kind of level. Because it's not, I've said no access to technology, I'm expecting none of these to have access to, none of these exercises to focus on technology. However, sometimes, as I say, the chatbot won't quite do what you want it to do. Anyway, it did. And then lastly, just for the sake of the audience there, I translated these exercises into Hindi. I have no idea whether that Hindi is correct or not. Perhaps some of you can tell me that it's not. It looks okay to me, but I wouldn't know. So here we have simple use of a chatbot to come up with some definition and some ideas for exercises, quick exercises that can be used in a classroom activity that may start you off in your thinking of this, may add to existing thinking that you have. Okay, so I've talked a lot there. Has anybody got any questions about what they've seen there, or is there anything that I've missed in there? I'm just going to look at the chat now.
Nick, I think we are good on questions. There was one question about the difference between a specific prompt or a general prompt, whether it's better to sometimes iterate on a general prompt. And one of the answers that I gave was it's better to start with specific unless you want to be more creative and you're not sure what you want yet. So I don't know if you want to build on that. And then it looks like we have a few people raising their hands.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good point that Vriti makes. Sometimes when you're prompting with chatbots, you don't quite know the specific information you want to go into, as Vriti just talked about there. Sometimes you're just building on ideas. And sometimes, despite that framework I put up earlier, I will not prompt like that. I will just sort of swim ideas around. But what I will use to do is do that for a while and then start to use that to focus my intent, get my ideas together. And then I'll simply open another chat and start it again, and then start to use that framework. So it's almost as if I've used one for ideas and then another to start prompting. Another technique you can use as well is to actually what we call turn the tables, where you can actually put in a lot of ideas into a chatbot and ask the chatbot to actually give you the sort of prompts that you should be using. And I can show you that as well. Okay, I'll just deal with some of these questions that are coming in. Okay, somebody's asked about, is this equally and similarly applicable to Gemini? Well, that's very interesting because Gemini is actually considered to be at the moment outperforming ChatGPT in the way it's, especially in the trial of the advanced use of Gemini, the free trial that's available for 2 months. So yes, this should work it's similar to what we're seeing here. It is a different LLM, but the structures that we're using here should work the same. I'm not sure whether it works being pleasant to Gemini, but it can't do any harm, can it, to be pleasant to a chatbot? That's what I think. But yes, they should be transferable. They're definitely transferable when you're using Claude, as I've used before, and I've used Copilot and those kinds of things. Custom instructions, or are you going over custom instructions, or even more with files and etc.? I'm not going to so much go into uploading files and looking at those kinds of things. And if you're talking about custom instructions in terms of custom GPTs, they're all paid for versions. So I'm trying to keep this with the free versions. That's what I'm looking at here. And are these ideas free from copyright restrictions? Well, that's interesting. We're into the ethics conversation there. That is an ongoing debate around where this copyright comes from, where in fact these ideas sit, who owns these ideas. There's a lot of legality involved in this, and you should be mindful of those things, and you should be open with your students about talking about those ethics. A lot of the content apparently comes from Wikipedia and some from Twitter back in the day when it was scraped from the internet.
Nick, I wonder if you can keep going with your presentation, and I'll log all the questions, and I'll make sure that I ask you after your next break.
Awesome. All right, so let's move on to a different example then. So the second point that was on that I got from that paragraph was regarding critical thinking activities. So let's have a look at this one here. All right, so now I'm going into a bit more sophistication in my prompting. I'm getting the idea of setting a location, so the context. So I've actually said you are a teacher working in Indian public schools. In this case, you're attempting to encourage middle school students. So I've made the age range a bit broader, but I've still kind of confined it to an age group. And this is going to be talking, of course, about critical thinking. So this is going to be trying to get them to think more critically. Again, I focused on paper-based because I'm not sure what access to technology the students have. You could, of course, say using their phones, using their laptops. I've also put a time limit on here. So approximately 1 hour. This is to give students that focus on critical thinking. So in the last example, we had those small exercises. These are bigger exercises. And then I've said I want these listed as detailed bullet points. That's back to that idea of framing the output. So I want to tell it how I want this information given to me. I could have asked for that information in a table or various other things. Okay, so it comes up with some different activities here. We talk about using puzzles, case study analysis, debates, all sort of different ideas here. And because I asked for 10, it gave me 10. As I said, sometimes it won't. Okay, now I'm choosing one of them. And for one of them, I've said, provides a comprehensive example for number 8 from the list above. So I didn't even tell it was ethical dilemmas. I just said number 8. Okay, I did say from the list above, just in case it thought I was talking about number 8 and not number 8 from that list. You've got to be careful of that sometimes. And I've also reiterated the idea that this is in this context here. Sometimes it's good to remind the chatbot. Okay, so now it's actually broken this idea into a lesson. I didn't ask for that, so it's given me more detail than I actually needed. But it's interesting that it's taken the context, so it understands the context in Indian society. And the objective is about critical thinking. So we're talking about moral decision-making, ethical considerations. And it's come up with an idea of a lesson, begin this lesson with this, and it breaks it all down. So it's already creating that lesson plan for you, or ideas for that lesson plan. Don't forget that all output from a chatbot is not something you have to be beholden to. You can take that and run with it however you want. You can decide to have this bit, exclude bits or change bits. It's just the output that's given to you. Okay, and then it's got an extension activity at the end. So It's given me a number of ideas. And what I do like is it's given me 3 different ideas for scenarios. Okay, so we've got the idea of a student witnessing cheating during an exam, a person finding a wallet filled with money and struggling with whether to return or keep it, and a family facing financial difficulties and contemplating whether to accept a bribe for a government job. So that's the chatbot deciding that those are important in the context of Indian society. Now, that probably makes you start thinking about, that's interesting, isn't it? Why it focused on those 3 things. And does that actually show some bias? Is that a correct representation of Indian society? And that could be an important discussion to have with students as well. If you were displaying this on a whiteboard in the class to show them how a chatbot considers Indians' ethical dilemmas in Indian society, that would be a talking point in itself. Or you could just print this out and give it to students and talk about this is what a chatbot has produced. So that would be a discussion on ethics in itself. So I think that's a really good example of a variety of things and the idea of how chatbots work and how you can prompt chatbots and what you can get for them in terms of planning and ideas in your teaching, but also how it's interpreting a particular culture, a particular society in which you live. All right, so they're 2 pre-prepared examples. I'm now going to go on to showing some live prompting. So hopefully I'll be pretty good at typing because it's quite late at night here. So hopefully that doesn't affect my performance. All right, so let's go with a new chat. So for those people who are not used to using chatbots, you're going to see me create something here. There's going to be some unpredictability about it. But what I really want to focus on is going back to that slide. I know I don't have it on screen at the moment, but it said in that slide, which was a summary of what was from the Indian government's document. It said children must learn how to learn, think critically, solve problems, be creative, be multidisciplinary, and innovate. And education must be more experiential, inquiry-driven, discovery-oriented, learner-centered, discussion-based, flexible, and enjoyable. As I said, there's a lot there. But really, a lot of these can be brought together, and they should be brought together. You shouldn't be having one lesson where it's inquiry-driven and then another lesson where it's enjoyable. There should be happening, as many of these at once. So let's try and put some of these things together. And let's try and put them also in a particular context of a subject. So let's start by saying, and we'll start with the same thing, you are an expert. I always use the word expert. It's just a trend, just a habit I have. You are an expert maths teacher. Let's talk about maths, shall we, in this case? Not my favorite subject, but that's okay. You are an expert maths teacher. You are working in Indian public schools. Again, we're giving that idea of setting the location because that's going to be different than working in an Australian public school because it's going to be a different curriculum for a start off. And also the student interests are going to be different. Okay. Let's talk about, I want ideas for a 30-minute activity in a lesson to, let's deal to 15-year-olds in this case, which looks at solving problems. So we're looking at solving problems. The activity needs to be inquiry driven, enjoyable, and experiential. Oh, we are being optimistic here. So it's got to be inquiry driven and experiential as well. Okay. So always, or try and remember to actually specify how you want this information. Because if it's just going to give me one activity, do I want it in paragraphs? And I've said ideas. So I might want to actually go back and go I want 3 ideas. I always like it provided in bullet points, but let's do it as a table. Provide these examples in a table with full description. Okay. Okay, so it's getting together a table now. Okay, so we've got a cool maths escape room there and some real world scenarios. It's gone back to that and a puzzle challenge. So you can have a quick look at those there if you can see those. So we're an idea of logic puzzles, number sequencing, geometric. Of course, if we'd have specified uh, parts of maths that we wanted to focus on, say it was algebra, or you wanted to focus on linear equations or whatever, or long division, whatever area of maths you wanted to focus on, you'd have got more direct answers. If you wanted to connect certain things, certain parts of the curriculum with other parts of the curriculum, you could have done that as well. We've got a budgeting exercise there, and also optimal routes in that. And then lastly, we've got the idea of an escape room, and then covering, and it's suggesting many examples there, including algebra, which I talked about before. Okay, so we've got those ideas for a maths exam. So we can now, as I said, build on this. So let's look to combine these activities with, I'd say, English language learning. So we're trying to bring English and maths together to create cross-curricular activities. Okay, before I do that, I did say to you to try and be nice to it. So you can say something like, thanks for the ideas. And we'll put a please in there as well. Okay, so now it's just basically used the same ideas and put ESL. This is where I'd sort of go, that's not very good. I want it to do more than that. So this is where I would look to iterate, because all it's done is stuck ESL on the end of these. It hasn't really done much with them. It has put some things, yeah, in here, so it's entered some other things in there. So you'd probably have to provide some other prompts. So we look to, so you regenerate is a good word to use. So regenerate these ideas with more creative ways to involve maths and English. Now we've got something a bit better. So we've got some literacy in math puzzles, a bit of language infused STEM stories, a math quest of a language expedition. So it's actually, that's had a bit more success. So you can see how reiterating and sometimes not accepting what you've been given as the first answer, and this regenerate prompt here, and then using a bit better language, that prompting skills, and thinking about what you actually want from it and being willing to experiment is going to help you. So that's where we're starting to combine those cross-curricular things together. And then, of course, we can take any of these. So let's take language infused. I'm just going to copy and paste this. Okay. So I'm going to go, these are much better. So I'm giving it some encouragement. For language infused STEM stories, please create a 30-minute lesson plan with details of all resources, timings, and instruction materials to be given to students. So not only are we getting a lesson plan from this, we're also getting details of the resources that are going to be needed if you need to get some resources together. We're also getting timings, just in case it doesn't give you that, although sometimes it does anyway. And then we're actually going to give the materials that you're going to need to give to students. So there could be resources you need to prepare to deliver. There could be also resources that you need to give to students. So if you look, it starts to detail this. Just giving you a chance to have a quick look at that. Okay, so it's broken it down into timings. It's largely done what I want. It's even decided to give me a little homework. Okay. Now, if you have access to technology, or your students do, you could say something like, convert or provide a version of this that uses computers. Okay, and it'll give me a different version of that. So within seconds, I've got two different versions of the same activity. I've also, within minutes, been able to regenerate different ideas, as we saw earlier. So this is a massive time saver, but not only a massive time saver, also getting you to think more deeply about different ideas. You know, it's almost like having a critical friend, having somebody in the room who you can bounce ideas off and use to share your own thinking and get the ideas from the chatbot and actually expand your own thought. So there are criticisms out there that this will stop teachers thinking, stop students thinking, make people lazy. But that's not the case if used responsibly. If used like this, it starts to prompt more thinking and to stimulate ideas, which you can expand on. Okay, so I've shown you that idea there of maths example, and then we tied it up with English. So let's try and come this in the last example that we'll probably be able to cover today. Let's try and cover this, the idea of coming at this from a different point of view. So if we try and look at the list there and we look at like the idea of being creative, multidisciplinary, innovative, because innovative is quite a hard one to deal with in the classroom, especially if you've got a large number of students and you don't have access to a lot of technology or outsiders to come in and set challenges, those kinds of things. So we can start to look at this from a more holistic point of view. So if you say you are an education expert, we'll make it quite broad. And now I'm going to be less direct and more open in the conversation. I am looking for ideas on how to cover innovation. So that's one of the things that was listed. Creativity, if I can spell that, creativity, learning to learn. What else did we have? We have learning to learn and critical thinking. We'll just include these elements. I'm looking for ideas on how to cover with students. In middle school, we'll stay with that idea. And we'll also tell it in India again.
Nick, while after you hit enter in there, I have a few questions that I wanted to run by you that I'm seeing in the chat.
No problem. In an Indian public school. And then what we'll do is I will put, rather than, let's just leave it at that. Let's see what it does now. So I've just said I'm looking for ideas. So immediately it's trying to provide me with a list. So even very simple prompting can sometimes generate quite good ideas. And that's why in that example of that framework I put together, there's a level 1, a level 2, and a level 3. And sometimes a level 1 can be enough. Okay, let's go with some of these questions then.
So one of the reoccurring questions is about differentiation. So there have been a few questions about how do you differentiate lessons and make them personalized and
Yes.
change them. So if you can just talk a little bit about how you iterate and differentiate, that'd be great.
So one of the ways that we use chatbots frequently in my school is that what we will do is have students sit using a chatbot as their learning assistant. So they may get the instructions from the teacher or get some of the work that they have to do, and they will seek clarification. So one of the techniques they may use is they may copy and paste some of the instructions they've been given and then say something like, explain this to a 10-year-old. 10-year-old's really a standard that we sort of use for our middle school students, or even for the senior school students who are having struggling to understand something. So if we talk about explain linear equations. So very, very simple prompting. Okay, I told you maths is not my strong point, so I'm probably not going to understand this. No, I don't understand that. Okay, so if I don't understand this, if I need differentiating to understand this, can you explain this to a 10-year-old. Okay, so now we get it in different language. I'm just seeing if I understand that. Yep, I do understand that. So that makes more sense to me. If you still don't understand that, you can ask it to break it down into steps and so on and so forth. So that's a differentiation technique that you can use. If your students don't have access to technology in the classroom, that's maybe something you could do on the whiteboard. If you do not have access to an interactive whiteboard or a display, then perhaps it's something that you need to do in advance and provide that printed out to them. But that's a way of differentiating with chatbots. A very simple, a very crude way, but it's a very effective way.
Another way that I've seen teachers do it is if you have a lesson plan that you really like or a unit plan that you really like, you can copy that unit plan or lesson plan into the chat and then say to ChatGPT, please create a version of this that is appropriate for, and then put in the differentiation you want. So if it's a student with learning disabilities, if it's a student in a certain grade, if it's a student that has certain talents that you want to highlight, if it's a student who has certain interests, like you can actually just change it entirely. One of the things that I've done for my nephew, who really loves dinosaurs, is I will put a lesson plan into ChatGPT and I will say, turn this lesson plan into something that someone would love, someone who loves dinosaurs would enjoy. And it basically differentiates that lesson plan for somebody who loves dinosaurs. So that's a really great way to differentiate. A couple of other questions, Nick. What would you say is the difference between Perplexity, Google Bard, Claude, and GPT? And you could throw Gemini in there too.
Perplexity is something that skins on top. So really that's accessing the ChatGPT behind it or other LLMs. So Perplexity, the good thing about Perplexity is you can use it without even signing up. So that gets rid of some of the issues regarding age. You can't save your chats, but if you don't have to sign up, then you don't have to worry about all that sort of hassle and the 13 sort of rule. But Perplexity is working on top of ChatGPT. It also accesses other models. If we talk about Claude, that's working on a different large language model. Used to be very good at creative writing, favored by authors. It's gone a bit strange recently. Some of the guardrails have got tightened. Same thing is starting to appear in ChatGPT as well, and it's producing some strange results. Google Bard doesn't exist anymore now. It's now being reskinned as Gemini. Again, this is a different LLM that's working off, a different large language model. Getting a lot of traction at the moment because of the quality of the output, and the advanced version that's available for 2 months free is also enabling you to upload videos into it, which can be analyzed, upload all kind of pictures, document. And because it's working on a Google engine behind it, there's a lot of power there. It's sort of like we all knew that Google would come to the party and produce something very good.
Yeah, all of these models work differently. They all have different strengths, but I think we've found that ChatGPT is the best at text and language generation. And it also happens to be the one that has been continued to be free, whereas others have put a paywall in front of them.
Yes.
One more question, and then maybe you might want to move on to the Adobe example.
Yeah.
So the question is about bias, hallucinations, and political leanings. So the algorithmic bias, so if you want to talk very briefly about that.
Yeah, the reality is despite claims otherwise, and despite attempts by OpenAI and other organizations to remove bias, that is basically impossible. The algorithms that are in place, the LLM that it takes data from, we've got to consider where that data comes from to begin with. For a start off, as I said earlier, a lot of it comes from Wikipedia. There's already bias in there. It comes from Twitter. There's already bias within Twitter conversations. Some of it apparently comes from Reddit. There's going to be bias in there as well. So you're going to get bias in there. And the algorithms, there is no way of hiding this. The majority of algorithms created in any situation of any technology is by white males. So there is going to be inherent bias as much as people want to remove their bias. That is going to exist. Now, there are things that are done to try and guard against that bias and try to eliminate that bias, but they're never ever going to be 100% successful. But I think you've got to stand back and go, bias exists in all forms, doesn't it? A textbook, if it's written by somebody, does that not have bias? You know, a website, does that not have bias? But yes, that bias does exist, and it's something to be aware of, and it should be made clear to people who are using it, as we talked about before when it was looking at ethical considerations there. Hallucinations. Yeah, an interesting one. Now, hallucinations is just one of those weird things that happens with chatbot, the unpredictability. Hallucinations can appear for a variety of reasons. Maybe the chatbot just decides to go off on a tangent. Maybe it misunderstands what you're trying to do. Sometimes it just seems to do it for no reason whatsoever. It's just something you get used to. The guardrails that are being imposed more and more on chatbots are starting to produce more strange results, where it's almost as if chatbots are refusing to answer certain questions. This is happening more with ChatGPT. It's certainly happened a lot more with Claude. And yeah, so having more guardrails can produce a safer environment in some ways and arguably less hallucinations. But then if it's not going to answer the questions you put in or not provide output for you, it becomes less functional. So there's always a balance between having it hallucinate sometimes, but being useful, and having it too tightly controlled, and then it's not very useful at all.
Yeah, that's a great point. A few people, and then we have a few more minutes left, so I want to make sure that you can do your image generation example,
Yeah.
if you want to tee that up. So a few people have asked about using this for research for your PhD work or for research in your school. And you can use it for research. You should cite that you're using it for research.
True.
And there's actually a new guideline out that is an MLA style guideline, which is a globally accepted research format for citing your references. And I just dropped the link in the chat, and it actually shows you how you can reference ChatGPT if you end up using it.
Yep.
Great. So I'll pass it over to you. We have just a few more minutes. There are a few more questions I wanted to ask you at the end. So let's do the Firefly example, and then we'll do a few more questions.
Yeah, so image generation is another type of generative AI. Chatbots obviously dominates the scene. We've got text to video, we've got all sorts of different examples, but image generation can be something that can be quite a fun exercise if you've got students who've got access to technology. But it's also something that can enhance your own presentations, your own resources. I'm using Adobe Firefly here because for every user, it provides a certain amount of free credits. But for anybody who's in education, there are lots of credits to be had, and apparently that's going to be unlimited, according to a source I have within Adobe. And apparently it's available in India as well. So I'm signed in on my school account up here. I'll just move this out of the way. So this particular account is signed, but if I signed in a personal account, I'd still be able to use this. I just wouldn't get as many credits. And when I talk about credits, every time you generate something, it uses up credits. So if we're talking about text to image, that's what we're able to do. So this is Adobe Firefly. You can just Google it and it'll come up, and then get yourself signed in. I'm going to ask it to generate a particular image. It also has images already available. So let's see if it'll do Taj Mahal at sunset. See if it'll do that. So as it's generating this image here, you can see down the side, it's set a default of an aspect ratio of a square. I can change what shape that's going to be over here. I can also upload my own image if I wanted to interfere that. Oh, wow, that's interesting, isn't it? That is not the Taj Mahal at all. Wow, that is definitely not the Taj. Well, it's not the Taj Mahal I visited anyway. So it really doesn't understand the Taj Mahal in that. So that's not worked at all. So let's see if it will go Delhi at sunset, people in the street. Okay, let's try that. And you can also put effects on here. So it's very menu driven. Firefly is using Adobe stock images. So any questions about ethics as regards where the source materials come from, this has come from their actual own source material. Oh, that's been a lot better, hasn't it? So that's how I remember some parts of Delhi. So they're using stock image there to, as I say, to create this image. So this is the idea of text to image. So I can take that image, I can further edit it in Photoshop Express or something like that, or I can just download that image. I can also go back and change the shape as I talked about there, or I can put effects on top of it and regenerate it with different effects and all those kinds of things. So a very handy little image generator. As I said, a certain amount of it is free, or you get a certain amount of credits, and very useful. And I only looked at the text to image. That's just a different effect there. We can go back to here, and there is generative fill, where you can upload a picture and you can remove, as it's doing there in the example, remove certain aspects of the image. My kids love doing this. And then change some of the aspects and change some of the things on the image. We've got text effect. I'm not particularly convinced that's the best in the world, but it's quite cool sometimes in the little things it do. And then we've got some other things here, generative recolor, but they're really small tools. So it's really this text to image that's most useful for you. There are other ones out there. Indeed, if you've got a paid version of ChatGPT, you can do it within there. But yeah, I still use Adobe Firefly sometimes, and the images are always of high quality, which is really good.
Yeah, and another text to image tool that is available to most teachers for free is Canva. So you can go to their Magic AI, and it has an excellent text to image
Yes,
tool.
true.
And some of the ideas for how you can use images, so generating images, if you want to create supplemental materials for your students, and you want to maybe tell a story or do a vocabulary word, and you want to show them images of that vocabulary word, you can have students create images based on their understanding of a story so that they can create stories on their own. You can change a story. So let's say you're telling them a story and it has certain characters in it. You can have them actually generate an image that might change the plot of the story so that they understand how the plot changing works. So there's a lot of different ways. Nick, are there any other examples you can think of for how folks can use images, AI images in their teaching?
Well, right there, when you talk about Canva, is really Canva's sort of leading the way at the moment in that idea of bringing together AI into a suite of tools and having it work together really well. But if you're talking about images and text together, being able to put images on a screen, just putting an image up there and changing it, as Vriti talked about there, and having kids creatively write about that. Or the alternative in a project we did actually with year one students is we got them to imagine these mythical creatures that are indigenous to Australia, but there's no actual representations of what they look like. So they had to read the descriptions of them, or they got them read to them because they were year ones. And then they had to come up with words, adjectives to describe what they thought this mythical creature would look like. And then I put those words into an image generator, and we generated these images. And that was so, so powerful to have that visual representation of words that kids have come up with. Yeah, the imagination from a bunch of year ones, what year one to us is about 5 or 6 years old, was quite astounding. Yeah.
Another question was, can you use these tools with kids? And the answer to that is yes, you can, but you have to monitor it because, as Nick mentioned earlier, there's a lot of, issues with these tools, and we don't know if the data is secure. So if, anything can be brought up in these tools, and usually it doesn't use any bad language, and so you're, generally safe from that. But you just want to make sure that you're monitoring what students are doing, and also make sure that you're not putting any personal information into these tools because they're free tools, and so free usually means that they can use the data how they please.
Yeah. Yeah, two things is responsible and safe use. So you want to teach students to be safe, in other words, not putting any personal data in, not giving any credit cards or signing up for anything. And also not giving too much information away about anything that they're given. And that's not just their own personal information, that's also other people's information, especially when you're doing a bit of data analysis and you're just copying and pasting things in. But also the responsible use as well. We want students to understand that they are using tools which are very powerful and can ultimately take away some of their learning and some of their thinking. And we don't want that to happen. We want them to be discerning users of these tools.
One more thing, so we can actually do this live. So Nick, have you seen the voice control in ChatGPT?
Yeah.
So there's a really great plugin, and for all of you that are practicing your English or your Spanish or any other language, ChatGPT actually has a free plugin that you can add that has voice control, and then you can talk to it like physically talk to it in one of 15 different languages, and it'll respond back to you and give you feedback on how you're speaking that language. And so what you want to Google is voice control on Google, and then you click on the Chrome extension to add it in, and then you can actually start having conversations and practicing any language that you want with ChatGPT for free, which is pretty incredible.
The only reason I didn't do that, Vriti, is with my accent, it doesn't tend to produce very good results.
Gotcha. Yeah. So it is limited to a few different accents, but it's a great tool for practicing English, and I've practiced Spanish with it, French with it. I think there's a couple of other, there's I think a total of like 10 or 15 languages that are available. So
Yeah.
we're actually 2 minutes over now. But Nick, thank you so much for this presentation. This was super helpful, very illuminating. And we're going to have, and Sandeep, you can sort of jump in here too. We're going to have more of these. We're going to have more sessions that will both be, more deeper dives into this so that we can practice some things together. We're also going to build tools of our own. So next time we're bringing a ed tech tool that allows you to build a free GPT and share it out to people. And we're also going to talk about the theory and the philosophy behind AI. And so all of that is coming. We'd love for you to join us, and you'll find more information in an email soon. But I'll let Sandeep close it out. But thank you so much, Nick, for being here, and thank you to our audience for being such a lovely, and engaged audience.
Yeah, thank you so much, Vriti, and thank you, Nick. This was illuminating for me personally in many, many ways. When we started this series, I said, you know what, we want to do this because I want to be able to learn along the way myself, and can we figure out how to make that learning happen with many others? And so I feel like I'm walking out with a lot of learnings personally. So thank you for this. Folks, as Vriti said, we're going to continue these. We're going to continue forums, continue trying to lean into the world of AI. Please follow us at the Circle on LinkedIn, on Instagram. You'll be able to get more updates on these. And we'll be in touch with more soon. Thank you both again. This was quite incredible.
And thank you for the lovely comments in the chat. It really does make a difference when you tell us your feedback. So really appreciate it. And then I think Amina put a feedback form in the chat. We'll email that to you as well to make sure that we have your feedback. And we want to make sure that the sessions that we do are really useful to you. So the more feedback you can give us, the more we will tailor that content to you. And remember, these are always going to be free. We really want this to spread. So thank you guys so much. Thank you, Sandeep. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Amina. And we'll see you guys next time.